conservative, doesn't matter. And what we came up with was a plan. And the leadership from the House side, from the Republican side, started the discussion. They came back with what they thought honored the contract with America. About $30-some billion in cuts. Small, okay, very small. But once again, we're limited to these two pies right here, okay? The freshman class, as others said, you know what, that's paltry, especially when we're talking about a deficit in just this year alone of $1.65 trillion. Paltry. So the freshmen said, can we ante up more? This speaker said, great, where do we want to go? And so went the open rule process. And that's how we got H.R. 1. Okay? What happened? We went through over 800 amendments, of which 300 amendments were ruled out of order because they were not germane or didn't apply to application, which means they weren't talking about these two areas, or they were trying to legislate, not cut. And those were a lot of senior members of the legislature, because we haven't done this. This is open debate, open discussion, all the way around. So then we vote on it, and it goes off to the Senate. And what did the Senate do? Nada. Nothing. Nothing at all. Did they have to? No. So what did we do? We tried to push them off their keister. And by the way, if all of us ran our businesses like the U.S. Senate, we'd all be all broke. And we are broke. We are broke. Yep. And that's exactly the problem. Okay? So what we did is we thought, we'll give them a little more time. So we talked about the $100 billion mark. So for every week, you must cut $2 billion. So for 2 weeks, $4 billion. And what did Mr. Reid say? Mr. Reid said the most he was going to cut is $6 billion. That's it. I'm not cutting any more. Less than 2% of just the deficit on this year alone. Okay? So we passed the short-term CR, and what happened? They voted it up. So we're cutting $4 billion. We're still waiting on that first bill. Well, they're still not going to move on it. Mr. Reid didn't want to move it, and he's got that prerogative. So we said, we're going to give you 3 weeks this time at $2 billion a week, an additional $6 billion. And they said, okay. So now we're at $10 billion in cuts, and agreed to and signed. What actually happened there? Well, Mr. Reid said the most he was going to cut is $6 billion, and all of a sudden we're at $10 billion. Did you feel the difference? I didn't. Was it painful? No. We can do this. And then we came to the discussion on the full CR. Now, when we talked about that first CR, there was an individual we have to bring up, and that is the Secretary of Defense, Mr. Gates. Mr. Gates agreed in this first CR to a budget-neutral bill. No increases, not taking a cut. We're just outside the cuts that we had in the CR with the engines and stuff like that, but no discernible cuts. Well, something happened on the way to the next CR. Because all of a sudden he extorted us saying, I need $8 billion more. And then they used it as leverage in the discussions. We have 4 theaters, folks. And then the Department of Defense went out and showed every military folks all across the world what their earnings paychecks were, and the government wasn't even shut down. That's the end of the discussion for me. You do not use our men and women across in harm's way as a pawn in this discussion. Paltry, yes. $44 billion in cuts, and then another $8 billion in revenue add-ons for the military. But what's happening with that $8 billion? I forgot to tell you, you hired somebody who's going to kiss and tell, because you deserve to know. Yes, this president and this administration is going to take out the military out of Iraq, and we're going to replace it with somebody else. It's a force that's going to be under the authorization of the State Department, which has never been done before. There's a special interest to this, is that when you're in the military, you're under international law. But under the State Department, which has never been done before, you are no longer under those auspices. You are under the care and the jurisdiction of the country you are in. So if you are in Iraq, you're under the law of Iraq.
Wow.
That means that if you are a soldier and you are in confrontation and you kill an Iraqi, you are subject to the laws of the Iraqi country, not international law. Isn't that interesting? And we still don't have all the details. We'll get back to it, Joe. Okay? But that's what happened in this discussion. That's why we had such a paltry number of cuts. And once again, it's limited to these two areas, here and here in the military. Okay? Now what can you do in a budget? A budget opens every single piece of this pie here. It allows me to take something, cut it, and move it to another area. It allows the full discretion of the legislative process. And once again, we did something different. This speaker involved the committees and said, committees, start working. Take education. And we'll highlight that in a minute. Take energy and commerce. Take power. Take minerals. Take jobs. Try to make sure that we are building legislation. And that's where we were. And in 2012, we came up with a budget. Okay? And one of the things we want to start looking at is where these pieces of the pie are. Okay? So in non-discretionary income, or budgets, we spend in 2010, and it's pretty close, about $666 billion. In our military, we're at $692 billion. Let's just cut them both, totally. We're still not even out of debt just for this year. The biggest growth problems are some of the other areas. Because as of today, this year, for every day we're here, we add on 10,000 new senior citizens in Medicare. That's just the way it is. Okay? Which brings up the next part, the debt ceiling. We're bumping there. And everybody says, hey, you can't do the debt ceiling. Well, unfortunately, let's talk about our Constitution. Because this House went by 3 rules. Where in the Congress does it allow you, or in the Constitution does it allow you to do it? Number 2, does it create jobs? And number 3, does it minimize the government? Well, in order to start your Constitution, our forefathers actually guaranteed every bit of our debt. The first time it's ever been happened in world history. So you do guarantee your debt. So it's not about a matter of if, it's by how much and how you want to do that. And I would give you an analogy as a parent, and most of you folks are parents, is what happens when you've got a child that does something wrong. You put them in timeout, and you try to curb their pattern. So the first thing we did is we got people starting to talk, not about spending, but about cutting. So we've accomplished number 1. Now we've got to continue doing that. So if you bump that debt ceiling, don't give the child with the bad credit card rating all that they want. Give them $500 billion and say, listen, by the following time we want a benchmark of the following cuts. Make them work. This is a process. This didn't happen overnight. It happened over multiple administrations. This isn't a Republican deal. This isn't a Democratic deal. This is an American deal. But once you face the facts, we can make a solution. Because that's why I'm here, is to include you in that process. That's where we can make this difference. So when you look at it, the greatest impacts that we're having is the Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security for the 2 aspects. And I'm going to put this down here for just a second. Okay? This is where we're exponentially going. Because there were 3 premises done within the entitlements. First of all, that each successive workforce was going to be greater than the one